what's the explanation for this that modern archaeologists use?
100% something going on. And Petrie, back in the late 1800s, was scratching his head looking at this stuff, and he goes, there must have been a weight of 2 or 3 tons on one. Like he sort of said it was a jeweled tube of bronze that did this. But he was looking at it. He knew a mystery when he saw it, and he couldn't explain it.
Like, what's the wildest speculation as to how these things were made?
Well, I'm pretty convinced that there was. There's obviously saws and tube drills that are powered by something. Now, I think it may not just be pure friction. There might be ultrasonics involved. One of the whole interesting things I like about this space is it's like, and this has to do with even like the energy stuff that Randall was talking about, that he's coming to talk about as well. There are realms of science that sit outside of our understanding. We'll know more tomorrow, in 10 years, in 1,000 years about science. So I think when we look at some of these things in the past, we should be open-minded enough to consider the possibility that some of the answers may sit outside of our current perspective, because our tendency is to look at it all and try and how would we do it?
Right.
How would
Does
our
anybody
technology solve
have
this?
wild speculation that you've entertained?
Yeah, I think there's So one of the topics that often gets mentioned here is like ultrasonic drilling. So having it resonate at a frequency that matches the native frequency of the rock and sort of separating the rock more easily. And that's a technology that we're developing. Like, we do some ultrasonic drilling like this today with jewelry and stuff, and you literally vibrate. You find the correct vibration. You can put like a little star-shaped bit through a stone. They do it in like small work. I've seen lots of examples. And if you turn off the machine, it's like Excalibur stuck in the stone. You can't get that thing out. Like, you need that vibration to go through it. Plasma, you can even go as far as, well, they were softening the stone somehow with some molecular technology. Speculation like that. I would also say that some of these examples of technology and machining extend way up to these massive objects. Like, you have 1,000-ton single-piece objects that also exhibit some of these signs of precision engineering. So you might be talking about some truly giant machines that made them. Giant columns and statues and things like that.
And what do conventional archaeologists say when they're confronted by all of this data? The pottery, the vases, this stuff that you're looking at here. What do they say?
Well, you either just get a denial and they won't address it, and you get dismissed as just being ridiculous pseudo archaeology fantasy theory type thing, or in the case of the tube drills, for example, they will, and it's a funny story, because they will argue that no, it's not spiral. The grooves on that thing aren't spiral. And in fact, in the textbook, this is what Chris Dunn found out. In the textbook where they do try to address the engineering with that tube drill, they took the photo of the tube drill and they just tilted it just a little bit. So when you look at it on the page, the lines look horizontal. It's literally in the textbook.
Oh, they fucked with it in the textbook?
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
They altered the photo because if you admit that tube has a spiral groove on it, now you're admitting that they're cutting into that granite at a ridiculous rate, and you can't do any of that stuff with any of the primitive tools. It has this flow-on effect that just knocks over this house of cards that says all this stuff was built with primitive technology, and our whole concept of the ancient Egyptians is off. Now, I don't think I think the dynastic Egyptians, they used primitive tools. I think they just inherited a lot of stuff that's potentially a lot older. And the proof's in the puddings with these vases, for example. That stuff, those things disappear from dynastic Egypt after the third, fourth dynasty. They don't make them anymore. They make alabaster vases.
Is that a tool?
That's a fantastic example of what I would call an out-of-place artifact. It's a hollow tube of lapis lazuli, which, by the way, there's no quarries for lapis in Egypt. The closest one's probably in Afghanistan. Came from Gebel Tariq, found in a pre-dynastic site. It's hollowed. It's perfectly made. This is a very difficult thing to achieve, even with modern machinery. And it's displayed in a cabinet next to what? Bone and beads. Right?
And what is that? What is that supposed to be? That tube?
It's something decorative, I assume. It has a gold sheath, but it's a hollow tube. I actually have pictures of it from the end on, not probably in the ones you have, Jamie, but yeah, hollow tube. It's an out-of-place artifact. Like these things from hard stone, and these are more examples. Rock crystal, obsidian gourds and vases that show just perfect, just very high degrees of sophistication.
You should mention the
pre-dynastic,
the statue faces and symmetry. How can you possibly do that by hand? This will wow you.
Yeah. So there's there's a whole category of aspects to the discussion around ancient technology, right? And I have to be kind of careful about what you say, oh, it is or it isn't, because in reality, we really haven't analysed that many artifacts. This vase work that we've done, first one we've actually taken a look at, that core, that's the first one and the only one that's really been analysed. So I characterise something that's beyond the capabilities of these primitive ancient civilizations as being, okay, machining marks, tool marks, like these giant circular saws, tube drills, precision, and there's elements to precision, and one of those is symmetry. And there's been some interesting studies done on the faces of giant statues. One in particular is the face of Ramses. There's a statue at Luxor. They've since put their head back up. It's up now 30 feet in the air on top of the statue, but it used to be on the ground. And again, Chris Dunn was real seminal in this. He went and took a photo, like bang on, like very front on, and then what he did was you take a copy of that photo, you make it 50% transparent, make the original 50% transparent, you take one and you flip it like on that horizontal axis, then you overlay them, right? So you would see like the left to right, it's like overlaying the left side on the right side, and it's perfect. It's this face here, but I wonder if you can find the picture of Chris Dunn. That's actually
there's your video right there.
Video's there as well, where I get into it.
Website, but that's not that picture you're asking for.
No, it's similar, but it shows other aspects of the same radius of tool being used to cut. But what's interesting about the symmetry, it's perfectly symmetrical, left to right. Now, this isn't a feature in humans. No human is perfectly symmetrical. Different nostrils, different eyeballs. It's also not something that is done in artwork. So, people often say, well, Michelangelo, he carved David. It's a beautiful statue. I've seen it. It's incredible. But it's human. It's not symmetrical. Symmetrical is, you can't achieve that degree of symmetry just by eyeballing it and doing it by hand. And it's also something that's not really human. I think some of these statues almost look a bit inhuman because of that symmetry when they're up there and they're staring at you, because it's mind-blowing to actually go and look at them. But it's the other aspect is the most efficient way to create that would be to say, well, if you were going to design it in a computer, it's like, well, I'm going to create half this face in a program and map it out, and then I'm just going to reverse it and say, well, that's the other half. It's literally the most efficient way to do it, and that's kind of what we're seeing in some of these statues.
Go back to that image, please.
It's virtual perfection. They did it by hand, right?
They do it by hand. That's literally what they say. You just don't. They're not engineers and construction experts at the end of the day. That's the problem. So it's very difficult to engage them on those specific details.
Another
that look scary?
video of yours that I watched today was a video that showed the similarities, not just between pyramids, but between construction methods all over the world. In Japan, I had no idea that they had made the sarcophagus covers in Japan that were exactly the same shape as the one, and oddly shaped, exactly the same as the ones they made in Egypt.
And in a place, there is supposed to be zero connection between ancient Japan and ancient Egypt. That's not supposed to exist. And if you compare that sarcophagus work, it's like it looks uncannily similar.
Almost impossible that two people would come up with the same design.
Right.
Because it's like coming up with, I don't know, I don't have a good, like if someone like this lighter, if someone this is an unusually shaped lighter, the way the top pops, if someone just coincidentally without any internet came up with this on the other side of the planet, be like, how the fuck? It's so oddly shaped.
Right.
Like the buttons in the same place, the lid's in the same place. There's no way.
Right.
That's what it looks like to me. And the fact that it took an enormous amount of effort to make and move and put it into place, because you're talking about incredibly heavy stone.
And hard stone.
Yes.
Like that's the other, people don't appreciate just how hard this igneous stone is that these things are made from. Like granite, granodiorite, cyanite, like it's harder than steel. Like it's there's 6.57 on the Mohs scale. It's incredible work.
And the fact that these similar construction methods existed in Peru, they existed in Egypt, they existed in Japan, and we don't know how old stone is.
Right.
That's what's really wacky. When we talk about like carbon dating, they're not carbon dating stone. No. They really don't know. So even when they go back to ancient Egypt and they say, oh, we date the pyramids construction to 2500 BC, it's a fucking guess.
That's what I think.
It's a guess.
It really is.
It has to be a guess. It really can't be anything other than a guess. They can measure organic matter. They can measure stuff that's in between the stones, but we have no idea when that was put there. If something existed for tens of thousands of years before we're dating it, we really wouldn't know. Well, we would have evidence that of course people would still live there. Of course people would still live around them. And we would have evidence that those people had left stuff behind that was a certain age, but we have zero evidence as to how old those things are.
Right.
That's right.
And when I found that out, I was baffled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I always thought they knew 2,500 BC, rock solid. This is it.
Well, they tie it to the guy, the king. They know when Khufu lived, and so they try and tie. And literally, with the Great Pyramid, very little evidence. There's like this big statue of him that they found down in the Valley Temple, nowhere near it. And then there's a glyph on the inside. There's a lot of controversy around that. But there are some of these artifacts they do for that reason, because they date a lot of stuff based on the site that they found it. So if there's organic material at the site that they found it, I've found it's a kind of like a smoking gun piece in all of this, is all the vases. So are you familiar with the incredible stone vases that they make in Egypt?
Please talk about them.
Yeah, so there is a collection of these things. They're made from igneous stone. And Jamie, I've got a few pictures of the vases in that vase directory, and they date back. It's what's interesting to me about these is that they're some of the earliest types of artifacts that we find. They stretch back far into what we'd call pre-dynastic time, basically Mesolithic times, right back to even 15,000 years ago. There was a site called Toshka that was dug up. It's underwater now, but and it was a primitive burial. There was a guy that was curled up in this burial site on the side.
Go back to that, Jamie, that one, the thin card one.
Yeah,
what's going on there?
So this is an example, and these vases display just astonishing aspects of precision and engineering. So this is an example of just how thin this material is. So it's igneous stone. This might be porphyry or something like this. A very, very hard stone, very hard to work, but also brittle when it becomes thin. You can see the giant crystal occlusions, the white marks in it. This stuff becomes brittle, yet it's been worked down to this thinness because this one's been damaged, and you can see how thin that interior wall is. Flinders Petrie is the great Egyptologist, the first guy to really start applying engineering principles from the industrial age to this stuff. He found one, he talks about one in his work that was 1/40th of an inch thick. Wow. A 40th of an inch thick. And the interesting thing about these vases, there's 50,000 plus of them were discovered beneath the step pyramid of Giza. He collected them all up, and even in the museum that's at Saqqara, they talk about, this is so. I've been down underneath the step pyramid. This is a fragment of one of these vases that I found you can handle down there. And even in the museum there, they talk about, he didn't have them made. These were inherited objects from earlier times. Like they get the concept right. And so these things stretch back way back into time. There's pre-dynastic artifacts from pre-dynastic burials. But there's always these sort of arguments, can you do this by hand? Can you not? And so recently there's been some work done. I've been working with a couple of guys, the son of Christopher Dunn, who wrote some real seminal textbooks on ancient Egyptian technology, his son Alex, and Nick Sierra. They're qualified, professional metrologists. They work for Rolls-Royce in Indianapolis. They make aerospace parts, turbine blades, things like that. They've got their hands on a pre-dynastic Egyptian vase. And for the first time, they've actually been able to scan this thing using a structured light scanner and define the specific elements of precision on it. And it's just astounding. Like this puts the whole concept of can these even remotely been made by hand to bed. Like these things had to have been made on a machine and made with extreme precision, because this vase that is pre-dynastic, this is a picture of the vase here that they found in a private collection. Because I should say, generally archaeologists, Egyptologists, they're not engineers. They're not particularly interested in sort of how things were manufactured. So what they've done is they've taken this and put this in a machine, and it's a structured light scanner. So it creates like a point cloud of different lights, and then you match a geometric shape to it, be that like a flat plane, a cylinder, a sphere, a cone, and then you can perform sort of geometric calculations on it and define things like precision. So if you go back to that, the surface A, the vase lip, right? So this is, you can see down on the bottom, they've created a point cloud of the top of this lip, so the flatness, and they've called this surface A. It's comprised of 3,813 points, and it's within 3,000ths of an inch of being basically perfectly flat.
Wow.
But that's
3,000ths of an inch.
3,000ths of an inch.
And this is over who knows how many thousands of years of
Well,
erosion and sand and dust and wind. And
Exactly. It's at least 5,000 years old. I suspect this could be far older than that. Now, what's interesting, once you start doing this, and if you go to the next one, Jamie, now we're looking at the lip. So you take a cylinder and you basically take 10,000 points plus, and you match the inside, the mouth of the vase to a cylinder. And what you can now measure that against the other surface. So if you think of like the top of it as being like the x-axis, this is now your y-axis. So that first symbol here, the perpendicular symbol, what it's showing is that how perpendicular is this cylinder on its axis relative to the top of the vase, the surface A that's on the top, within 1/1000th of an inch.
1,000.
So it's perfectly perpendicular to within 1/1000th of an inch of the top of